Hi everybody, welcome to Ohneganos. Let's Talk Water episode, season 2 episode, let me
Seven.
see, 7 of, Ohneganos. Let's Talk Water. I'm your host, Makasa Looking Horse, and right away we're going to start off up with a song that's called AURORA, and it's called
The seed.
The Seed. And we're playing this because it's called The Seed, and we're playing this because we want to address like that Europe has Indigenous people also. So this is
She's Norwegian.
so
Viking tradition. There you go.
yeah. So she's singing in her language and doing her traditional dances.
Well, I think she makes up her dances. I don't know if they're traditional.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. We're on a reserve. There's dogs.
Go ahead.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Ohneganos. Let's Talk Water. I'm your host, Makasa Looking Horse, and this is my co-host, Dr. Dawn Martin Hill, and she's also my mother. We did start off with AURORA called The Seed, and that was a music video that had dancing and was from the Viking tradition. So, yeah, we wanted to start another live stream just to make sure that we can everything goes smoothly and there's no interruptions within this live stream. So I hope that our live stream and our internet connection is good because we're having a pretty rough day today with our internet connection. So bear with us. And I wanted to let everybody know what this week's episode is about. So this week's episode is about the water crisis in Canada and Indigenous communities. The Canadian government is on track to meet not on track to meet their promise to end all long-term boil water advisories in First Nations communities by March 2021. And like I said, we started off by playing a song by Norwegian artist AURORA, because in the past the Vikings were some of the greatest seafarers and had a strong attachment and connection to water, which is very similar to Indigenous ways of thinking. Essentially, there is a connection that our people once had to Europeans, which has been broken by colonialism. So our research on the project has partnered with people like Dr. John Pomeroy and the Director of Global Water Futures, who is the Director of Global Water Futures, which funds Ohneganos Water's Life project that we're working on right now. And Dr. Dawn right here is the lead investigator for the Ohneganos Water's Life project that's here in Six Nations for the past 3 years. And she has currently did an amazing interview on CBC Primetime talking about the water crisis in Canada and Indigenous communities.
Yeah, you may have heard that the community up north in Northern Ontario was evacuated. So it brought a lot of attention nationally to the fact that an entire community doesn't have access to any source of water and had to be flown into a city during COVID. So that's why the interview is relevant to the topic today. And we hope these things get resolved really quickly.
Yeah, and we're going to show the video right now.
And we also have Chief Mark Hild here today, too. He joined us. Hi, Mark.
CBC video?
Is it playing?
That was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking earlier today. Why are so many First Nations without clean drinking water, and what is the solution? Joining me now from Six Nations of the Grand River is Dawn Martin Hill. She is a professor of Indigenous Studies at McMaster University. She is also the lead on a research project that aims to determine sources of water contaminants in Six Nations in Ontario and the Lubicon Lake Nation in Alberta. Dawn, welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
Liberal government will miss its target to lift all long-term water advisories on reserves by March 2021. What's your reaction to this?
I'm glad that they have put this on the radar. I'm not going to say, well, they missed their mark and all a lot. On the other hand, the way the government could move to address crisis COVID took strategic national plan to address a long-term issue that we were going to be in lockdown. They need to address our water issues in the very same way. The health impact, as we know, and as have been proven by other studies, are quite detrimental in a myriad of ways. So they need to take the same strategic approach to addressing the crisis our people have been in for a long time.
Okay, I want to talk about that. Let's first identify the problem. Why is it so difficult to get clean water to these First Nations communities?
The best way I can explain it is Canada and the policy of a colonial regime that took our children away and put them in residential schools was assuming that assimilation policy was going to work with the official policy of Canada. Dr. Campbell Scott did in the House of Commons, 1929, parent said, I want to continue until there's not a single Indian left in Canada in the body politic. So that was the plan. So they did not develop or build infrastructure, economies. They basically, as elders have said to me, reserves were no more than a concentration camp where we were left to die. So there was no infrastructure, no roads, hydro, everything on a reserve is problematic. And the reason for that is colonialism and neglect. And now, not only have we survived, we're still here, but our population is growing in leaps and bounds, and we're beginning to see the neglect and the abuse, or what some would call environmental racism, including myself, that most of our lands and our areas, if you're an Indigenous person in Canada, are dumping sites for contaminants and for factories. So they've destroyed one of the greatest bodies of water that our people have been around for millennia, in literally 150 years.
So when you say environmental racism, what do you mean by that in relationship to the pollution of the water?
Well, if you look at a map of Canada and you look at where dumping sites are, pipelines, I mean, anything that's going to be environmentally damaging, you're going to find a reserve. And when we're only 2% of the population in Canada, but yet somehow Chemical Alley seems to be all along where Anishinaabe live in Northern Ontario, which many of the problems are long-term, including mercury contamination and many other problems with their source water, let alone having clean drinking water. So here at Six Nations, we have the Grand River, 23 different waste comes out of all the towns upstream, and they just, for some reason, put a dam in Brantford and then a dam in Caledonia, and then they dredged the Grand River really deep. So a lot of the sludge and waste settles here, and then the cleaner water filters down towards Caledonia and Cayuga. So there's just one example of how it seems that we're the dumping sites, and the same is true for the United States. They have the same situation.
It's interesting.
That's environmental racism.
Okay, and it's interesting because in doing this story recently, not only Neshkan, Taga, but other reserves as well, don't even know what it is in their water that is potentially making them ill.
And that's the case for many First Nations. I think our study through Global Water Futures is co-creating tools with scientists, engineers of civil, chemical, finding out what's in our water. And we had no idea here at Six Nations that we had a problem, let's say, with mercury, because all the studies that were done prior never mentioned heavy metals. It was the elders who said, there's heavy metals you need to test. So I got another grant because it's costly to do this research, and found that it was coming out of people's tap water. So we have issues that we had no idea the gravity of, and this is a reserve that has a fairly urban, we're situated between Caledonia, Hagersville, Brantford. I mean, we have access to universities and services that many northern communities do not, and we have trouble finding out what's in our water.
Yeah, why is that? I mean,
well, we don't have the infrastructure. Yeah. They're like, if you look at Walkerton and what happened in Walkerton, you have a water authority, you have departments, you have funding so that people are trained in succession and people are monitoring. There's no structure with First Nations communities. They don't have these departments that are funded that can oversee, public works is barely surviving. And public work here at Six Nations, they make their money by charging residents every time they come to take waste away, or every time we get water, we get charged. So that's how we fund our local public works. It shouldn't be that way. Those are things the government under the UNDRIP, under the United Nations, is supposed to provide to every citizen. It's just Indigenous people don't benefit from that.
All right. Is there any plan to, Dawn, put that kind of infrastructure in place so that you have the not only equipment, but the trained individuals to continually oversee and make sure the water is clean?
Well, I mean, I have to give it to the guys who do run these plants, because there is no formal legal framework. I mean, their families are going to be using this water, so they care deeply. except if one of them gets sick, we're all in trouble. So they said, we really need to start finding a way to accredit water treatment plant operators. So we received another grant to try to train not only people here in the community, but across Canada, because they were all looking for that certification and how to run these water treatment plants. And that's what happens when you don't strategically develop on a national level, using universities, using all of the strategic skills out there that's going to be needed to resolve this issue. That didn't happen. It was just very focused on boiled water advisories, but that really diminishes the overall problem with our water. For example, Six Nations has a state-of-the-art treatment plant. We used our own monies, by the way, to have that plant with the government. No money to operate it, no money to pipe it into the homes. And if you have a water treatment plant, you need a waste treatment plant. They go together. So where's all the waste going to go? There's no development on that front, no funds. And those are the types of things where our community's dealing with the water crisis, but we wouldn't show up on any list in Canada, nor are we eligible for those funds because we don't have a boiled water advisory. Although we do, if they use their well, they do have a boiled water advisory.
Okay, so what I'm taking from you then is that we need a water department in this country, proper testing.
First Nation.
For the First Nations specifically, for Indigenous communities specifically, testing, equipment, proper training. Yeah.
And Trudeau, he said in the throne speech, the Canadian Water Agency was going to be funded, but who's going to run that? Where's the First Nations? Canada's water policy, 70 years old almost. We're not in it. We need to be included in that department, and we need to develop it as First Nations people, but we're not being contacted to do so.
What have they told you about not including you?
Well, I haven't been told anything if it wasn't for the lead of Global Water Futures in Saskatchewan reaching out and advocating on our behalf, because I'm a part of their team, I wouldn't even know there was a Canadian Water Agency happening. So I think the idea is that we're pushing hard to say, please, there's this whole country of goodwill of engineers, hydrologists, hydrogeologists, all of them go around the world fixing water crisis issues. They're more than willing to help here and to begin to partner with First Nations in order to resolve these long-term issues. But there's no strategic plan, and that's what we would hope would happen. So if it wasn't for John Pomeroy with Global Water Futures, we wouldn't have been included in the consultations. Now we're advocating, and Six Nations wants to push hard to say we need to do this because isolated communities in the north don't have the same access to services or engineers in the way, let's say, Six Nations does, because we have 5 universities within 50 kilometers. We need to help others. We need to do this thinking of others, not just ourselves here at Six Nations.
Dawn Martin-Hill, professor of Indigenous Studies at McMaster University and the lead of a research project that aims to determine the source of water contaminants of both Six Nations and the Lubicon Cree in Alberta. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Hi, so that was an interview that was done regarding the situation of boiled water advisories and generally the water crisis in Canada. And I want to introduce Mark Hill, who's our elected chief here at Six Nations, one of the youngest. But I also know of him for working with youth councils, and I do a lot of work with youth councils and his work on water. So I'm not even sure if the community knows, Mark, your prior life before you decided to jump into the abyss with elected leadership. So I just wanted to acknowledge it's a conversation we're trying to have. Like, we will do some presenting, but Mark, jump in if you want when we're discussing things and how it relates. But I don't know if you wanted to say hi to everybody.
glad you're here. We need all the help we can get to deal with the water crisis. So you heard me give a shout out to John Pomeroy, who has done an amazing job in my view, because I've been known in this community to advocate for First Nations inclusion and Indigenous studies and all that good stuff. It took dozens of years and 1,000 meetings, and I was shocked when I talked to John as the PI of the one of the studies, and he literally just did it within like 6 months, and it was a little mind-blowing for me, because usually there's meetings and meetings and meetings and questions. So I just want to say, if you want to get things done, John Pomeroy is your guy. So I'll introduce you properly. I know you didn't want me to, but I think it's important for our community to know the support and the advocacy of people like yourself out there, not only for Six Nations, but First Nations in general. So John is the director of the Global Water Futures Program, the largest university-led freshwater research project in the world. At the University of Saskatchewan, he's a Canada Research Chair in Water Resource and Climate Change, Distinguished Professor of Geography, and the Director of the Center for Hydrology. That's just a few. I actually cut out quite a bit there. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the American Geophysical Union, the Royal Geographical Society. He's the recipient of award after award. And this one really, this one is interesting because I try really hard to publish. And I was joking with Karen Kidd about how much she's published. And you've published as a leading expert on hydrology. You've authored over 350 research articles, several books that have been cited in over 17,000 times. So just kind of the top of the field if you want to know water in this country, and really probably globally. John would be the person that probably knows. So welcome to our show, John, and I really am looking forward to hearing from you. So yay for you. Great job. Do you sleep? Do you, like, I don't know how you guys do this publishing. You have to give us the secret.
Just keep going, and got a lot of really good students in college.
Yes, students are everything, right? We got 2 out for Global Water Futures, so we're getting there, But, John, I know we want to talk about climate change, and I know people hear about the First Nation water crisis. What I don't think they hear about is that Canada as a country is in a water crisis, because they seem to think Canada's got it all sewn up, and they so don't. And so I was hoping you would talk to us or help us understand how First Nations kind of fit into this larger crisis, if you will.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You know, uh, Canada is in a water crisis, and a lot of people are in denial of that. And it's maybe easy to live in a big city where you turn on the tap and you get good clean water, and you flush your toilet and the problem's gone. And you go down to your cottage on the lake, and the lake looks pretty good. And but as you go to different parts of Canada, you realize there are problems. And First Nations, so many First Nations that still don't have drinkable water in the community, let alone the source water that provides life for the aquatic ecosystem, for fish, for the animals, for the people. That can be in trouble in much larger areas, even outside of the community. And then we have floods, and the floods have increased dramatically. Droughts have become worse. Wildfires in the forest have increased tremendously. And the northern part of Canada is warming faster than the rest. So we have ice in the ground, permafrost that's thawing in northern Canada. The glaciers are retreating in the mountains. Snowmelt's coming earlier. Ice roads are failing, and communities can't get fed because they can't get the trucks down the ice road. There's lots going on now, so we're in we're in a water crisis, and because Canada is warming up faster than the rest of the world, they can look to us to see what climate change really looks like, and it's not very good in many places.
Canadians don't realize is that the whole world is looking at Canada, and that Canada is at the epicenter of climate change. Like we're not talking about it coming. Like we're really living it out in real time, and I really feel like not just at Six Nations, but the country as a whole doesn't get that. Like we're being watched by the world because we're melting, and impacts of climate change are happening way faster here. So maybe you could help us understand why that is, or how that's impacting us.
Yeah, could I show a few slides?
Yep,
Mhm.
please
Hey,
do.
Um,
Oh, do you have them, Hannah? Oh, okay.
He's gonna share his screen.
Oh, okay. So we're just waiting for John to share his
Yep.
research with us.
Here we are. Yeah, so I'll talk a bit about global water futures and why we created the program to start with, and then some of how it relates to Indigenous communities. Then I'll wrap up with some things that you mentioned, Dawn, the Canada Water Agency, something that we think the federal government needs to bring forward on. So the first thing I'll say is that water is life, and that's you have that exactly right with your project. And the United Nations recognizes this, and that's really the basis behind Global Water Futures. Water is the basis of our life and human activity, and it regulates the global climate. And so when the global climate is in trouble, the impacts on humanity and on the ecosystems that we rely upon are manifest through water. Water is how it's transmitted to us, and often in very unpleasant ways. We can't drink, we can't use it, we can't produce food, or we're flooded, or simply not available. Canada is known around the world for having almost the greatest amount of fresh water per person of any country. And yet, if you look at Canada, we're in the midst of a global water crisis that crosses the country, east to west, north to south. And that's a big shock to people in other countries. They say, if Canada doesn't have this right, how does anyone else have a chance? Well, we've been
Are you able to speak up a little bit louder? It's hard to hear us. It's hard
Hear
to hear
him,
in
yeah.
our
Just a little bit.
headphones. Yeah.
the
There you go.
and even though Canada has abundant water resources, except in the semi-arid western prairies, we haven't managed our water very well. And so we have permafrost thaw in the north. We have glaciers retreating in the Yukon, causing rivers to disappear. We have the contamination and the fires and the flooding on the Athabasca River through Fort McMurray that impact Indigenous communities downstream and Wood Buffalo National Park. We have floods in the Rocky Mountains, floods in interior BC, Trans Mountain Pipeline, with big concerns about how it's going to impact waters across hundreds of thousands of hundreds of streams. Prairie droughts that have repeatedly cost billions of dollars, and then followed by floods that have caused other billions of dollars. The recent problem with Nestle trying to abstract groundwater right near Six Nations without proper discussions and agreements and everything else that would be needed. Warming waters in the Great Lakes and algal blooms making Lake Erie toxic at times, and many other lakes across the country toxic. Floods in Toronto, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, you go across the country. Mercury contamination that has persisted at Grassy Narrows far too long. And then the mining proposals in the Ring of Fire area in Northern Ontario. So, and when we put this slide together 2 years ago, there were still 84 long-term water advisories for First Nations that were not dealt with. So this is not a country with a happy water supply. It's a country in crisis. And when we put some of the numbers together, we see that we've over $28 billion in losses since 2000 for flood, drought, and fire. And even though most Canadians live in the water supply per person for Canada is very high, because most Canadians live in the south and our rivers flow north, the water availability for people is actually not very good. and then climate change, warming so fast. And when we look to the future, things are very disturbing. These are maps of changes to temperature from the recent period to the mid 21st century to the end of the 21st century, assuming that we have ineffective greenhouse gas controls, which is where we're headed. And if we look at even southern Canada, by mid-century warming of 2 to 3 degrees, and by late century warming of 4 to 6 degrees. In northern Canada, we're looking at warming of 9 to 10 to 11 degrees, depending where you are by the end of the century. So that's such a dramatic climate change. It's hard to imagine what things will be like, how our lakes could persist in that, how our forests can survive without burning, and how we'll continue to produce food. It's a really scary future. And it's scary for Canada. Imagine how much scarier it is to our neighbors to the south that are already quite warm and already have summers that are too hot and tornadoes that are too intense and hurricane seasons that go on and on and on. So we've got a lot to worry about with climate change. And unfortunately, we're on this ineffective greenhouse gas control track down here. If we stabilize our gas emissions over the next few years, we can have a much more moderate future. And that's still a choice that remains to be made, but we're heading in the wrong direction now. And then you can take those same climate models and look and say, what's going to be happening to water? And well, the answer is that over most of Canada, there will be more water, more rainfall, in some cases more snowfall, some weird winters, but more rainfall especially. And so we can expect anywhere from 10 to 30% more precipitation falling over the country, but it won't be evenly spread. And that's the problem. It will come in cloudbursts, long multiple day storms that dump fantastic amounts of precipitation. You see a picture of the Calgary flood from 2013, and Saskatchewan, where I'm from, just had almost half of its winter snowfall in one blizzard earlier this week. It just paralyzed Saskatoon and so many communities in Saskatchewan at the same time as Southern Ontario is going through record warm weather. So, we can see that this is, the whole system is out of balance and nature's broken right now. And we're going to see more and more of this, unfortunately. So
Here at Six Nations, it's like November. It shouldn't be shorts and t-shirts weather in November, but it has been that way for quite a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and Monday in Saskatoon, the wind chill is minus 29. So it's
So extremes, I think, is people get it wrong when they hear climate
Yeah.
change. They don't understand. Like some people will be, it'll be fires, it'll be droughts and dry, and then other places, which I think Six Nations falls into, it's going to be floods and perhaps more problems around flooding. Then someone else won't even have water, so it's not going to be very balanced.
Mm-hmm.
no, the floods in the Grand River just a couple of years ago in January,
Yep.
rain on snow flood, and so many floods are of that nature and coming at strange times of the year, like midwinter.
Yeah.
It's a big problem. So a number of universities got together 4 years ago to ask the federal government for money to form Global Order Futures, and they gave us the money. We were a little bit surprised, and Master University was one of those. And we promised great things to the federal government, and they delivered the funding, and then we developed the program, and it was three big elements. One was to improve disaster warning. We wanted to be able to help warn Canadians better when water quality or flooding or droughts or conditions that would promote fires would be occurring. We wanted to be able to predict the future of water 50 years, 100 years in advance, so that communities, provinces, industries could plan for how they use water sustainably and how we could work to protect it. And then also we wanted to work with water users across the country to help them adapt to the changes to the water associated with climate change and help them manage their risks, which are changing. Flood risk is larger now in most communities. Communities that were safe once are not safe now. And the Also, the risk from losing their supply of drinkable water has increased, and these are all things that we're working on. Early on, I had the opportunity to visit Six Nations and spend time with elders and elected leaders, and Don Martin Hill led that meeting and set up that meeting, and that was wonderful. And from that, we realized that the Global Water Futures focus had to more prominently include Indigenous communities and address the problems they had. And so we had an initial meeting. We decided that in discussions with Six Nations that we would hold jointly our first inaugural science meeting on the Six Nations territory, and that was a wonderful event, and brought scientists from across the country, hundreds of them, right into Six Nations. The hospitality you showed was mind blowing, and we were so happy about it. And then, yeah, it was great.
And we had them do archery and lacrosse, and they canoed down the river.
They actually said you guys are kind of deadly in the lacrosse game, John. So,
Yeah.
our people really like engineers, apparently.
Yeah, they were playing catch
were
and
shocked.
running, and they were playing catch and running, and they had dress shoes on and dress pants.
And then they went for it and started knocking each other around.
It was really interesting to see.
But it endeared, I think, Global Water Futures to our community. So instead of sitting around talking about our culture, I threw you guys right into it, and you actually all just really blended in quite well, because everybody cares about the water and land, and that's what we care about. So there's actually an interesting partnership there. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, it was a massive event, and it changed Global Water Futures forever as well.
That was the plan.
Yeah, that was good. Anyway, after that, then Dawn said, "You've got to do something." So we started working on it, and we got together at Ohneganos near Saskatoon, and co-developed a strategy to promote more Indigenous community-led projects, and that was a process where we said, "All right, we'll grant money for these projects," but we worked with the representatives of Indigenous communities to develop the criteria by which the projects would be funded, the objectives for the projects. And we also said every project has to be co-led by someone from not just a university, but from the Indigenous community that they're working in, that this has to be co-development. It has to follow the two-row wampum style of parallel development. And that worked. And from that process, a number of Indigenous community co-led projects have developed across Canada, some on Six Nations, some in Northern Canada, some in the prairies, some in Northern Ontario. And there are other projects which have substantial Indigenous capacity as part of it, working with Cumberland House in Saskatchewan, or working with Yellow Quill First Nations. So from the prairies to the large river systems to the co-development of water quality sensors. The fascinating prospect of having chemical engineers from McMaster working with the Six Nations community to develop water sensors. This is revolutionary approaches.
No, the projects are amazing. How many altogether, projects are there?
Yeah, so there were 6 of the projects that came out of the meeting in Wanuskewin. And Dawn's project was the first true co-creation project that was put together. That was the Pioneer project. And there are other projects that I think because of the meeting at Six Nations made sure that they had substantial Indigenous involvement and Indigenous community linkages built in, and that's been truly functioning that way. Northern Water Futures in the Northwest Territories very strong. Prairie Water with the Prairie Provinces communities, and one on crowdsourcing water science, which is working with First Nations in Saskatchewan. So that's it's been quite impressive. I think nothing like it has ever really occurred in water science in Canada ever.
Breaking the mold. I think we have questions that Hannah says are coming in.
Yeah, we have a question for Dawn, and we have a question for you, Dr. John, and Hannah, can you say that?
So we can do Dawn first. It's from your CBC video. This is Zainab. She's a journalist. And when you said to Global News, the government didn't give much thought to the land where they sent First Nations. They didn't put in roads, housing, or infrastructure because they thought we were going to die out. They never thought we would still be here. Can you give more context on the water infrastructure and how it is rooted in colonialism?
That's a really big question. It's really hard to answer these in sound bites, and I know maybe Mark can help me out here, but essentially, so the assimilation policy, they didn't always put us in areas that we wanted to be in. There are many cases where people were relocated, particularly in the north. You think of the Innu, for example, in Labrador. They were moved from their original location to a rock that that is unable to sustain life. Let's put it that way. So they assumed that would be the last generation, and that the kids who went to residential school would go off into the cities and take, servitude kind of jobs, similar to the India model, except we were dying out. 95% of the population of Indigenous people had been wiped out either through disease. If you take our area here, it was the Peyton, the Neutral, the Erie, the Tutelo. They didn't make it through this era. So it's not as if the Canadian government was wrong that people did. It's called, I think, genocide on every other forum when you purposely try to take a people and have them not exist anymore. That's what it's called. And I think Canada is starting to come to terms with that through their inquiries. So they moved us often, or they put up housing. So if the Lubicon, who I've worked with since the 80s, are not in a place that they wanted to ever be. What they did is they would set up the school, or they would set the community up with some really low grade services. And then they would say, if you don't send your children to school, you're going to get put in prison. So people were coerced into these settlements who had traditionally moved all over the land. Remember, Indigenous people were never forced to live in a 4x4. Like, we moved freely amongst North America and Turtle Island. So just moving us into these little boxes created a bit of a problem. And then they usually put us in places that weren't positive, sustained, didn't have a lot of opportunities, isolated, because they assumed that generation was going to die out, and the children who went sent off to residential school would assimilate, and that fell apart. So yeah, no infrastructure, no piping of water, no water plants, no economy, nothing. And now you're seeing that the impact of that on their generation in climate change. And I don't know if Mark had any additional comments. I mean, you did go to law school, so you might know a little bit more about the legislation.
I think Don definitely covered it very well. But in terms of the most up to date, that's been part of the struggle all these years. As we were going far too long in our old water treatment plant, and the need of a new one was at the forefront and priority of this community at that time. It's still during that point in time, we still had to even pay 50% of that water treatment plant out of our own source revenue. So we had to generally take a loan out, pay for our infrastructure, because again, it was fault on the federal government, again, that didn't give us the adequate funding to actually get us to what we need. And so I think that was still an issue. I know, Don, you've also touched on the water lines. We have dollars, and I know it's a phased out project, and we've done the first 2 phases. But again, now the next problem is going to be, how do we connect our homes to those water lines, and so that where it's affordable for families. We already are living in poverty conditions, and there are already many challenges and barriers to many families in this community. And I think adding another one on top of that is even going to further, look to further challenges for those families. So I think that's obviously it's a responsibility of the government to at least look to, because I think a lot of the times too, it's when they look to funding these types of big infrastructure projects, it's more or less saying, okay, well, we only have this much and we can help you out this far, so you're going to have to figure out the rest, type of thing. And that type of mentality has to change right away. It's looking at the responsibility of Trudeau's government, and I know this was in the introduction of, they're not on track of the water boil advisories. So it's looking at those pieces, because you'll never see a city or a municipality faced with the same exact water issues that Indigenous communities are faced with. So I think I just wanted to add those points in.
We're on Crown land. We can't get loans. So people think, the government pays for things, and I need to tell you, you're so wrong. They don't. We actually carry a great burden just trying to access water. But because it's Crown land, some people have called it, in the Canada Business Association once called it economic apartheid. You can't take out loans if you are on Crown land. So your land has no equity. And again, that keeps you from growth, and then the other part of that suppressive policy is that we can't, um, even if we are able to I guess build our houses now. Six Nations have figured out a way to at least let us have a loan. But the other part of that problem, for First Nations, is that we are completely dependent on the government. Um, if they just gave Six Nations the money they owe us, because we had $80,000 from the Crown for our military alliance, and there was no banks back in the 1700s, so it went to the Crown. And Simcoe spent it, Jarvis spent it. They built the Montreal Turnpike. They built Osgood Hall. They were spending our money like crazy, and because they thought we weren't going to be around in 20 years to realize that they were taking the land. So in 1923, Duscothay, a traditional Confederacy chief, went to Geneva because he wanted to address this issue. So, we've been battling to try to have justice for a long time, but we are by no means people who expect anyone to take care of us. We work really, really hard. That's a first myth I'd like to dispel. Nobody's buying my water for me. I pay for my water just like everybody else at Six Nations. And it can cost up to $200, $300 a month, depending on how big your family is and how much water you have to purchase. So, there's a lot of stereotypes out there that aren't correct. So I hope that answers your question. Good?
Yeah. Yeah, we have one more question for Dr. John Pomeroy. And it's from Chris Martin. He says, any information on intensity, duration, and frequency of rains in our area? I've heard about IDF curves. Any information?
Yeah, it depends where you are in Canada. I presume you're talking about southern Ontario, and the IDF curves were recalculated recently by Professor Rick Soulis out of Waterloo, who's unfortunately passed away. But in many parts of Canada, most parts of Canada, the extreme rainfall events are increasing dramatically. And that means that the engineering designs from the 20th century are no longer adequate for storm sewers, for our communities. And this goes into basic floodplains. So the floodplains are shifting. And the federal government had a program to map them with the provinces back in the 1980s and 70s. It was dropped many decades ago, and those maps are out of date. They have to be redone.
their publication, newsletters, highlights, it's in there as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of the modeling I think that Six Nations had done was with the previous model. And when I was mentioning we needed to do more modeling, they're like, oh, we have modeling. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm pretty sure that modeling isn't accurate now because of the changes that happened 70 years. Like I don't know if people are aware of this. What's happening right now, all the climate change scientists said was going to happen 70 years from now, almost a century. So now we're all scrambling to kind of recalibrate where we are right now. I don't know, John, if you can elaborate on that piece, but
Yeah, no, very much so. I used to work for Environment Canada, and I had to lead a report on impacts of climate change on Canada's freshwater back in 1995 to 96. We said the water quality, we're going to lose water quality very quickly. We're going to have floods and all this, but we were still putting the dates mid 21st century. Um, we didn't realize that the models that were around then, how fast some of these impacts and disasters would come, and so we're scrambling now.
we're all
That's,
scrambling, yeah.
Yeah, that's why the work that you guys are doing is so important.
It's all consuming, I'll be honest with you. If I knew what I was getting into, like,
Did you want to talk about a little bit about your VR?
actually, no, I don't want to talk about our VR. I'm going to show a little bit about our tools, but I think I'm going to jump to Mark because I want to talk a little bit about the Canadian Water Agency. If John could kind of help us set that up. Um, as I mentioned in that interview with CBC, there is an old policy, like really, really outdated, that doesn't protect our water. And it doesn't include any Indigenous rights or people or governance whatsoever. And John has been leading, again, another frontline charge to get the Canadian government to listen to the crisis that Canada's in and start doing something about it. So, John, did you want to just address a little bit of that? I want to hear what Mark's thought is on that, and maybe introduce his work a little bit.
okay, yeah, I'll just briefly say some things. The Canada Water Agency, the discussions have been going on for several years, but the government mentioned it itself in 2019 as part of their mandate commitment that to the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Agriculture. And we've had a series of webinars this summer and talking to people across the country. We had one on Indigenous communities, one on agriculture, one on the Water Agency in general. And there are four main things that we think the Canada Water Agency should do. And we realize that the federal government shouldn't have its hand in all aspects of water in the country. Nobody wants that. Um, but they want the federal government to step up and do its part and to provide kind of that quarterbacking, leadership, and coordination that's needed across the country because our river basins cross provincial boundaries, they cross international boundaries, they cross from reserve land to non-reserve land and cities and countryside. And so someone needs to bring it together at least. And the big thing that people want is information. They want the knowledge that they can be used to predict and respond to water problems. They want to have that water quality data. They want to have stream flow data. They want to have forecasts of what's going to occur with the water in the near future. And we want the federal government to put in mechanisms that are joint between Indigenous communities and provinces and the federal government to anticipate, avoid, and resolve water disputes, and to help communities adapt to climate change, to put in better flood maps, and also practices that can control water quality problems. Let's start protecting our source waters in the first place before we have to treat them. It's much cheaper to preserve them than to treat them. Things like this. The third part that is a big part of our suggestions and came through very clearly in discussions with Indigenous communities is that reconciliation has to be part of what that agency is doing. The Canada Water Act dates from 1970. It was written without any mention of Indigenous people or communities or rights of any sort, and that has to be changed. So that act is ripe for renewal. And the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People needs to be implemented into federal water law and management. And this is something where the Canada Water Agency could be really quite a revolutionary movement for Canada and a different way of doing things if they co-develop the Canada Water Act renewal with Indigenous nations, and if they uh, uh, ask Indigenous nations and communities to lead their own water management. Most reserves are located in regions downstream of massive river basins that drain onto those reserves where they have no say in what happens. If you look at 6 nations of the Grand River, you're now limited to a relatively small territory fairly downstream of the Grand River. You don't have any say in what's going on upstream of you, and you should, because with that, then you have the agency to protect your own water. And so things like this can be looked at in there. And that all goes into improving collaborative river basin planning, building these partnerships to manage water for everyone, to restore our rivers, to make sure that the environment is handled in flow regime, and that we're conserving soil and water appropriately, particularly as we're dealing with the impacts of climate change. So those are just a few ideas that have been coming out about what the Canada Water Agency might do, knowing that it may not do all these itself, but it can bring the parties together to make sure that these things happen.
To take that on, I think largely because to me it's always about synergy. And I think, again, I mentioned Mark and his work with water maybe isn't as known unless you're in the kind of environmental advocacy world like I've been for probably too long. But I was aware of his advocacy, and I don't know if we have that video that I asked you for, Mark, to kind of explain, because I don't even know if the community is aware that you've been advocating for quite a while now for water protection, and you've been involved in working with youth. So it just seems like there's a lot of um, will that might not have been there before, but I think that we have the will now today to address something like the taking on a water agency in terms of being the Indigenous arm of it under UNDRIP, nation to nation, under reconciliation. I think Six Nations could offer a lot in all of that. And I know, Mark, you've been really supportive, as was Ava. I have to give it to Ava. Like, she fought hard to help this project off the bat, as well as the Confederacy has been amazing. And, I try to work with both. We have we're in the middle of a coming out of colonialism, and we have these two systems, and the way anthropology wrote about them, I'm an anthropologist, was really negative. And Dr. Teresa McCarthy, who's Onondaga, kind of did set the record straight in that she called it divided unity. And if you look at the United States right now, or any government anywhere on the planet, you don't have this whole peace, harmony, and we're all holding hands and hugging. I mean, that doesn't exist. Um, Everybody has the right to diverse opinions, but the way they wrote about Six Nations, it was like factionalized. We're broken, it's this narrative of being broken. And I think, Makasha and a lot of young people, they don't see it that way. They see a lot of strength in these systems that were forced to kind of deal with oppressive colonial policies. But instead of caving, it's like uh, elected council excelled at services and really advocating for housing. Like, we're the only people that have the kind of housing model in the country. Like, they've done an amazing job to get us services that a lot of other First Nations do not have. And you have to acknowledge that, as well as 17 PhDs live here. We're producing, a lot of, and then we have the traditional knowledge. Like, I think it's a strength. And I don't know, Mark, if you are Makasha wanted to address from a younger generation, not tainted like my age group.
I think first and foremost, it's definitely been young people in especially over the last, I'd say, 10 years, maybe even less than that, that has really driven climate and the importance of protecting the environment and water and so forth. But I think when it relates to me, even personally, and as an Indigenous person, it's really that connection too, right? That connection to the land, that connection to water, and what that ultimately means. There were times where I didn't even realize how much water meant to me. But when I would be, say, in stressful times or difficult times, I would find that being by the water is just ultimately calming. So there's a lot of it's finding that personal connection. It's finding to where exactly it means specifically for Indigenous peoples. But I think over my years that I've been working, I didn't necessarily even really think as myself as an advocate for water until now, really, that I look back and realize that this was the type of work that not only myself but many other young people, young Indigenous people, have been ultimately fighting towards the same goal. And so for me, it's when I was successful and fortunate enough to become the next elected chief, obviously one of my priorities was going to be and is going to be the environment and the waters and our land and what that means to our people as a traditional territory, but as well as our people overall across this country. And so for me, that has really been a driver, a motivator for me to continue this type of work. By any means, I do not, consider myself an expert by any means
Then
on this topic.
I'm gonna run that.
And that's why we partner. That's why we partner and collaborate with people like Dr. John Pomeroy and people through and look to collaborations with McMaster University and these wonderful opportunities, because ultimately we are all in this together. When you look at the previous slide that John had spoke about, by 2080, that's a scary future, not just for Indigenous peoples, but every human person on this planet. And I think it's something that where Indigenous people have the knowledge and have that already expertise, right? There's that traditional knowledge that is just as important as scientific methods. And I think that's an important piece to also recognize as especially as Iroquois Haudenosaunee people. We definitely have a responsibility when we see these types of things in actions against environment. You see the big corporations, you see the big companies coming in, and it's always ultimately about greed, right? And that's something that needs to be addressed and talked about, because there's going to come a point in time where no money is going to save any of us. It's going to be what exactly this world is going to be becoming, and it's like John had noted, it's not on the best track. And so for me particularly, I feel like Six Nations is also ready to co-develop on this project. We have to look at governance pieces. We have to look at policies in order to protect our water, especially when it comes to Six Nations. When you look at any First Nations, and we're so fortunate to where we are geographically located. We're Six Nations of the Grand River, so we need to protect the Grand River, right? And we need to look to those areas because, again, our source of water and all those around us, that is what makes us part of Six Nations. And so, for me, it's really putting this as a priority and really having a better understanding, because, again, I'm learning as I go through this as well. Like, it's the connections, it's how we collaborate, it's how we partner, and it's how ultimately we are going to actually address this issue. And it's going to take young people like myself and Makasha and Catherine and Hannah and all these, especially other Indigenous people and communities that are working along the same goal. You see Autumn Pelchier, and she's a strong, young, fierce Indigenous woman who's doing amazing things on this particular issue. But for me, again, I feel like this co-development, we've been ready. I think we have the opportunity, and we have to be able to take those opportunities and run with them. And especially during such a critical point in time, I think we have no choice but to make environment a priority. We have no choice but to make water a priority. And we need to make sure that, again, we're looking out for the next 7 generations, as we are often taught within our teachings. So for me, it's really, during my time at the AFN Youth Council, we really strive to at least have that open dialogue. That's part of the problem too, is to actually be inclusive to what young people are saying, right? It's not like where you're going in dictating a conversation, but I would much rather hear ideas and suggestions and solution-based conversations as opposed to something that we know we're all a part of. I'm sitting here and I'm still looking. Even for myself, I have personal things that I need to change, like as little as bottled water, right? And the constant, as we see it, purchasing. It's easy to purchase a case of.
Good job.
She did it. She's a great advocate, and that's why we continue. We need to continue to allow young people to raise their voices on issues that they feel strong about. And that was one of the ones that we and I know Makasa came to council at that time, and we still. That's why I said within our consultation accommodation process, who's to say that we even want to be in discussions with these types of companies? It may not be particularly specific to, they're not doing that to us at Six Nations, but they're doing it to other people around the world, which are terrible, terrible conditions. People in droughts, people in a third world poverty conditions. Like those are the type of people that I do not want to be a part of and have a partnership with. We need to look at their bigger world scale of a company. If they're so for, with particularly to Nestle, in the groundwater, and it's not as it's not like they're taking from the river itself. That's not the point. The point is the tract of what their company, the record of their company has on water in general. And I think that's something that can't be disregarded.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'll leave my comments there. I think Six Nations is ready to co-develop our own policies. I think we would benefit from having our own Canada Water agencies located here, right in Six Nations. And again, we want to help our other brother and sister communities. We are a fortunate community that, again, have more resources than others at times. But I think we're in a position to be able to help more than just Six Nations.
Did you want to address the Nestle? Maybe not everybody's aware of why we keep throwing Nestle under the bus, but you might want to just mention that.
Yeah, so Nestle, I learned that Nestle was taking 3.6 million liters out of the aquifer from Six Nations that already has a water crisis or water issue. And so when I learned that, I went to the Confederacy Council, and I also went to council, and I got the support. Well, because basically Nestle was stealing water from Six Nations, and like Mark said, not only Six Nations, but they have stole water from tons of other communities.
Flint, Michigan, who's without water. They're taking water in Detroit, California. You see what they're dealing
Brazil.
with. Kenya Village, a woman from Kenya came to a conference Kasha was at, and she talked about how they were promising to give the village clean water, and they didn't. They didn't fulfill that promise. So their track record is like really abysmal. But what's scarier is the CEO of Nestle wanted to make water not a human right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what really set me off, was, the idea that it's a commodity they don't even pay for. So I think people don't, and maybe John can address it, what happens when you drain aquifers is you dry out everything so that fires happen. Water plays such a central role, whether it's in the lake or in a reservoir or underground.
Yeah.
And you got to protect what little tiny bit there is. Like, there's very little clean drinking water.
There's less than 2% of fresh water in the entire world. So
I think it's 0.007%, if I'm not mistaken. John, maybe you can correct me.
Yeah.
Of drinkable water in the world, and there's a population that's growing worldwide. So water shortages are only going to become more extreme.
Globally, it's a terrible situation, and we've been in a water crisis for more than a decade. We have billions of people without access to proper drinking water and sanitation. This affects their communities, it affects women, young women growing up, most particularly in many ways, and affects education, and of course affects life expectancy and health. Um, and it is impacting now food and the ability for people to feed themselves, everything else. You look in Europe, look at the rivers in Spain, they're completely used for irrigation before they reach the sea. There's no consideration for the fish or for the ocean where these rivers used to flow. Um, you know, and the problems of infrastructure, of drinking water treatment, and all that in sub-Saharan Africa are, for instance, just terrible. There's a long ways to go there.
Canada, they think that there's this endless volume of water, and they need to understand no, there's not. And it's crazy to think that they've. I mean, when I went to northern Alberta to protest, but I also do research. To me, they're one and the same. I actually went with some Confederacy chiefs who are really, actually Ted Adaho from Syracuse, who is fighting fracking in their area. And if you look at the process of fracking, it's the most insane destruction of aquifer water. Uh, it it destroys what little water there is. Like, I mean, Nestle's bottling it, but I mean, fracking just destroying it. Um, and there's no policies to stop, which is why I think the Canadian Water Agency and building a policy with First Nations across Canada, like we can protest. And I said this publicly to Standing Rock. I was there. I've been a I'm a veteran when it comes to protesting. I'm generally involved in some capacity, even if it's just helping keep people safe during those times. And what we find is that this generation, and I didn't realize this, like they're growing up terrified of their future. And I don't know, Mark, whether you and I are in that, like, I think Makasha's age group and, the Gretas of the world, the 13-year-olds that I talked to, and she's got a film coming out with Six Nations youth. Like, their mindset is completely almost different from my generation in terms of they don't see a future. Like, they see what you're talking about, John. To them, that's very real. I don't know if Makasha wants to talk about all the youth events, and Mark, you as well, of how they have been raised in an era hearing that things are going to get very bad, as if there's no power to change that. And I think that's our goal, is to give the tools through Global Water Futures. And I don't care about politics. I'll be really honest with you. I care about my kids and grandkids having clean water and food to eat. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm way beyond all the ideological arguments, and just saying if we all just focused on getting our children and great grandchildren and looking 7 generations ahead, maybe we could build peace and reconciliation with each other and with Canada. But I know Kasha's been in a lot of conversations. I don't know if you want to share any of them about your age group and how they feel about being at Six Nations growing up
Do you have a question?
without water.
I mean, you
Let
can
her
talk.
answer that, and then you'll
Yeah, how about you go ahead
answer
and-
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I had when I went to the United Nations and I did the opening for the United Nations Youth Summit. I noticed there that there wasn't any Indigenous youth that were represented um, out of like the world. So I was basically the only Indigenous youth there that was in the climate change summit in the room. So, and I was just doing the opening, like I didn't, I
Oh, you
wasn't
did
invited.
opening words.
Yeah, I had opening words, and I did out Nestle at the United Nations, and I did say that this is because I did a pipe ceremony, and I did say that this is a real ceremony because we need to put all of our minds together, because climate change is real and it's not fake, and it's our youth reality. And I didn't see any other Indigenous youth there, and so I came back to Six Nations, and I organized a climate change awareness day that happened at Cheesewood Park, and I invited all the schools to go there, and the teachers to go there, take their classes for the day or for the half a day to Cheesewood Park. And I got a whole bunch of different booths that talked about like renewable energy and different things like that. But I also gave the stage to the youth so that they can, and had different youth speakers so that they had a voice, because I felt like my community didn't have a voice there. So I made a space where my community did have a voice. And so they on the stage said that they were really worried about our water, and that they're really worried about our land, and that they're really worried about their future, basically. And they all had the same kind of theme about like having having troubles and having thoughts, or they're having
Depression. Like, it was sad.
depression
It was
and
sad.
tears, and they're really worried about having a future. And some of the youth that I did talk to, that's going to be in my film, they did say that when I asked them about their future and children, they said that they didn't want to have any children because they're afraid that their future is not going to be healthy enough, so they don't want to bring any new life into it. So yeah, it's definitely, like, I can attest to that, that our youth are definitely afraid, because they said it at the Climate Change Awareness Day and also in the films. So
And at the UN, when we met at the Indigenous Peoples Permanent Forum and met with a lot of youth, they're all I would say, like, we're in a crisis, but the youth are in distress. And I mean, even Ohneganos has a mental health component now, because I had no idea that Indigenous youth particularly felt devastated by the inaction of their communities and the Canadian government. So I don't know if Canada is really aware of. I think Makasa said it best in the film. Every time she sees these developments, or Nestle, or dumping pipelines, it's like there's a million little cuts on her, and she wonders if others feel like they're being hurt deeply by what's happening. And I just think sometimes our our generation doesn't quite understand how deeply disturbing the whole climate change discussion is for young people. So I think our project really focuses on giving young people a voice, and that includes one of the youngest elected chiefs in Canada, Mark Hill.
mm-hmm.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, it actually ties in pretty well. So Zainab asked again, when it comes to the Neskantaga water crisis, how does the community fight such injustices when organizations such as the Ministry of Indigenous Services concluded it was not a public health emergency when over half the community was evacuated? What is the way forward?
Do you want to try that one, Mark?
So I'll read it again, because it looks like you don't can't really hear that well. So it says, when it comes to a Neskantaga water crisis, how does the community fight such injustices when organizing such as the Ministry of Indigenous Services conclude it is not a public health emergency? In brackets, when over and over the community was evacuated. What is the way forward?
Did you get that, Mark?
I think I got it. Sorry, I'm having some difficulty hearing, but I would say, in a sense, that's why we, as Indigenous brothers and sisters, I would say that's where communities come together, right? So when communities are in need, or look to, especially those types of very very challenging situations, That's where I would see, especially even with, say, for when I had mentioned earlier about Canada Water Agency here, that's where I feel like we could be assisting our other neighboring and sister communities and brother communities. I think, we as Indigenous people have always, when push come to shove, when something terrible happens, and we see this a lot in community, our community comes together. But the unfortunate piece to that is we shouldn't allow it to get to that point. We should be working together before it gets bad. So, knowing that the issue already exists, we should have already been in communication. We should be already planning to say, this is going to happen. We know that. So what are we going to do about it? So I think in a sense, I know we can't speak after the fact, but moving forward, I think that's where we need to have better lines of communication with each other, so that, and it happens even with our land issues. You see what's happening with the fisheries in the Mi'kmaq and Nova Scotia. You see what's happened with the Wet'suwet'en territory in British Columbia. You see what's happening here in Six Nations at Land Back Lane. When those call outs go out, our communities and Indigenous peoples literally come together quick, right? And so I think that's where one area that we can definitely look to is lending and reaching out to our other Indigenous communities for assistance, because I think that's where no matter what, it's when it comes down to it as well, is these are lives, right? These are human lives, and I think that is ultimately the responsibility of this government to address. And so if we look to the government, and if they're not meeting the needs, that's where we have to get creative, because again, I think it's getting out of that dependency on government and actually looking within in our other Indigenous communities to see that what we could come up with.
For us, the tools we're creating through Global Water Futures, like the platform, which I was going to show, but maybe we'll just tag it on to the end, that you can get a sense that the point of my whole project is to make sure every tool we're creating, like sensors, low cost sensors that our kids at Gaiwaneo and other students here at Six Nations will put together. But these sensors are being co-developed between the engineers at McMaster, and they've been meeting with the HCC Confederacy Water Committee. They've been meeting with hunters. She's organized meetings with health services. Like literally everybody has been, social services. Like we try to reach out and say what is needed, and what kept coming back was something we hadn't anticipated, like heavy metals. So we had no intentions on looking at mercury or arsenic, and because of that community leadership, we did, and here we found high levels of mercury in our tap water. And if Hannah has those slides, she can throw some of them up. So we have this really unique opportunity with Six Nations. It's not just the backing of the engineers at McMaster. We're working with Mark Servos, Wilfrid Laurier, Waterloo, anybody who's done work on the Grand River. That's who I want to be working with. And so they're on one grant, or I'm on their grant, and they're all wanting to work with Six Nations. They know that we have kind of like Mark said, we're lucky because we do have a lot of services. We have our own post-secondary in the community. We have a strong traditional knowledge through the Confederacy, keepers of the knowledge, like hunters. So to me, we're like really blessed. And when I go to Northern Alberta, and it's with the Lubicon, who didn't even have a reserve, whose land is being utterly just annihilated through the tar sands. There's like 400 to 500 oil wells just sitting within their community all around them, and yet they're living in abject poverty, their way of life destroyed. I mean, I know through going to these communities how lucky Six Nations is. I don't know if Six Nations knows. I know Six Nations is pretty hard. They really know how to crack the whip, right, Mark? So no good deed goes unpunished here at Six Nations. But they keep you on your
That's
toes.
that's right. And that's the other issue, right? Is we need to hold them accountable, right? If we have, we continue to do this work, and there's a lot of great work that's been done, and to be honest, there's a lot of answers. We have the answers,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's getting to those points of, well, let's actionize these things. There's I'm one of, I have a hard time when, yes, we can sit here and talk and me and Don, you alluded to this point earlier, with John, coming in, and in 6 months it's completed type of thing. It's getting to those action or solution based approaches, right? And I think that's the difference as well with young people is, let's talk, more action, and that's what the government needs to do as well.
Situation going on right now, and shout out to the guys. I mean, I interviewed Skylar way back during the first reclamation, and he was pretty, like, they really hurt him. I don't know how to say it. Like, the interview with him was devastating, because he was just trying to stand up for the land. And he spent 7 months in jail, and he talked about the really horrific things they did to him. And that's in the film, Dish with One Spoon. It's on YouTube if you want to look it up. But, they don't realize, like, Skylar was never going to go away. I mean, he stood his ground then, and his children will likely stand their ground. And the goal is that we just resolve these issues now. Like, just resolve a few of these issues. Stop trying to develop, whether it's a factory, whether it's bringing in 500 families and building houses. At the end of the day, the Grand River can withstand no more burden, human capacity. It's at its limit. It's actually over its limit. And people forget that the reason the reclamation happened in Caledonia in 2004 was largely due to the environment. That's what the clan mothers and Janie Jameson and others were worried about. So it's always been about the Grand River, and that it can support no more life. It's barely alive. And if we want to, there's other places people can move and build. We encourage them to do so. But right now, we just need to work together to resolve these issues. And I looked at what's happening in Costa Rica or in New Zealand, and what they've done through reconciliation. It's like a reconciliation of science and technology, is rather than arguing, like you said, wasting time, they've just found ways to, like, build a dialogue, build peace through building things. And instead of, like, arguing about who's right and who's wrong, let's just get to the business of building something that every First Nations and actually every Canadian needs right now, which is to protect the water and to let the communities know that you have to really take care of the water that you have now, especially aquifers. They're non-renewable resource, and the United Nations made laws: do not commodify aquifers. So, if we educate, which is what one of the grants that I received from Global Water Futures is doing, is through Makasha's work, through the digital stories that young people make, students make, Six Nations elders, traditional knowledge. Like, these are ways that we can give tools to people who want to understand our way of thinking. And I really do think science and the environment and water is something we can all agree on. Whether you're Greta or April or Makasha, you all just want to protect the environment and mitigate climate change impacts. One example with the Lubicon is, I know Weldington has been doing great research in northern Alberta now on fires and forest fires, with the boreal forest up in their Treaty 8 territory. But I wanted to connect his research with the Lubicon, because I don't think they know that there's going to be this huge problem with fires, and so what John was doing, and what I was saying to the leadership at Global Water Futures when I looked at all the work they're doing, is our people need access to all of that research you guys are doing, and also inclusion, but more importantly, they need to prepare, because I don't think the Treaty 8 people in Northern Ontario are fully prepared for the type of climate change impacts they're going to be seeing. And so we want to give them the tools, and that's what our project is doing, is creating tools for whether it's Northern Alberta, Northern Ontario. We're meeting with the Grassy Narrows. We want to go up there and train their youth on how to monitor water, download an app, how to read the app, how to take care of the sensors. We're trying to address, to be honestly, Mark and John, this is stuff the government should be doing. And we put in easily 80 hours a week. And I'm always saying, I'm doing the government's job. So to me, it makes sense. Okay, well, then let us do the government job and give us the title and give us the funds and let us do it, because we're already doing it with pitiful resources and no staff. I try to explain, Makasha is a student. I do this, like 10% is supposed to be what you do your research on. I have a job. This is not our full-time job. So people are like, well, why don't you do this? And I didn't get my testing results in time. And I'm like, this is what we do on the side. Like it's a small slice. But having something like a research center, Canada Water Agency, I mean, I would rename it to a Haudenosaunee or Anishinaabe Haudenosaunee, or we could have 5 names based on all the dialogues. Don't, but we would at least govern what's happening to our territories and have a say to stop dumping, to stop, abusing the water. Right now, we don't have a voice at all. No voice. So I really would like to see us move forward on that. And I know the young people they don't want to talk either. They just want to act. And I think we have Global Water Futures backing us. That's something that is pretty big, a big deal, because they have access to resources and information we don't. But they could make it available. I'm sure, John, what you're saying is you'd like to make it available to all First Nations as well as Canadians.
Yes, it's important to take that science and say this is what it means. For instance, we have models, hydroecological models that show the boreal forest disappears from where it is now and moves further north. Well, what does that mean? Well, the meaning is it doesn't just disappear, it burns down and doesn't grow back. And if you're living there, that's going to be awful. And that will contaminate your water and destroy your communities and ruin if you have a trapping or hunting livelihood, it will destroy that. And it's that interpretation of this which can only be done by people who are part of the community, part of the culture.
Creating with First Nations, and as far as I know, like this is something Harvey Longboat, the late Harvey Longboat chief, wanted McMaster to do, but we didn't have the skill to do it when we were barely able to pass our PhDs. Like we just weren't ready, but he invested a lot of time and energy at McMaster, and his goal, along with Chief Hubert Buck, Reg Henry, like all the greats, if you will, these were the wisest of the wise, where they could speak 5 of the 6 languages. They could say the Great Law in 3 different languages. I mean, the minds that I was lucky enough to be around, they wanted this day, So I told Charles and Ravi, the engineers that came to see me, I'll do this, but I'm doing it because that's the last thing those old timers wanted. They saw this day, if you will. Like I believe in our elders, especially they were ceremonialist and ritualist, and they saw this potential. And I remember when we were trying to offer Mohawk and Cayuga. Well, we offer language at Indigenous Studies at McMaster, but Harvey said, you know what? That's the community's job. And that's where Polytech was born, and you don't want to learn your language to be fluent going to McMaster. That should be happening in the community. What McMaster and these universities need to be doing is bringing their science together with our knowledge to solve problems that our children are going to be facing. And this was 1990s that they were saying things like that. So I thought, okay, we'll take it on. But I see very much that we have a lot of potential if Global Water Futures, sees it the way I think they do, is that they'll be backing us on every step, as well as the universities, to try to get more First Nations trained, certified, supported, get them the information they need to prepare. And that's really all we would be doing with this water agency, besides governance and trying to protect waters, is we would be supplying other First Nations with information they might need. John, is that the understanding of the Canadian Water Agency?
Yes, one big role you could have is setting an example, which you're already doing. But second, by having part of that agency located on Six Nations territory, and having the cultural and Indigenous science brought into it, then that's something that, of course, that's one of many Indigenous nations across the country, but those elements have to be somewhere. And if you can bring in other Indigenous nations from across Canada into your center, to help run and manage that component of the Canada Water Agency, that would be a very, very powerful example. And we've seen this with Atlantic Canada, where the First Nations have come together on a council, and others, and actually say, okay, we're going to manage the water, and so this is how we're going to do it. And but I think you're uniquely positioned in Canada to do this, with the links you have with McMaster, with UN University nearby, with your own history and development, and that's we have to start somewhere.
That has been started by Six Nations Polytechnic, but also, we started a consortium of 5 universities here where we agreed to work together when it comes to self-determination and First Nations education. So I also know, like, there's people in BC that are doing amazing things. I got to meet with some of them last week, and then we have water authorities from Nova Scotia. But I think in terms of generating kind of a United Nations model, I do think Six Nations has the infrastructure by far to kind of pull together both the bureaucratic, the policy, the governance, as well as the nation to nation water that needs to happen. I don't know. I did want to show, I don't know where our PowerPoint is. It kind of got held up in the abyss, so I'm not sure if we're able to show any of it. But I just wanted to show some of the tools that we've already created, as well as the footage from Lubicon, and I don't know if you ever did retrieve that, when we went there during the Slave Lake fires. And just to give people a sense of what was happening at that time, that's fine if you don't have it. We can post it later. But what I wanted to leave people with that Slave Lake fire, I just happened to be going to do research up there in 2011. And they got no help from the government at all. The federal government literally dropped 2 cases of water off on their doorstep and said, good luck. Like, these people had no evacuation measures, they had no support, and they used their own equipment. And what they did when I arrived, and I was going into the fire as everybody was leaving, and I filmed what was happening at that time. They were building burns, not around the houses in Little Buffalo. They built burns around their lake, which was, if you think about it, how ingenious that is. That's where their medicine is. That's where their food is. They wanted to protect the water, and they wanted to protect the animals. So they literally built burns basically around where their hunting areas are and around Fish Lake, or what on the map is known as Hague Lake, not around the houses, which is what you would think Western people would do. They want to save their material possessions. Well, the Lubicon didn't have any money, but they had some equipment, and that's what they did with their time, is they basically wanted to save the animals and the water. So that just tells you, when you give people the opportunity to make these decisions, they usually make the right decisions. And they're usually quite different from what Western thinkers or planners or policy people would do. I'm sure they would have built burns around people's homes. And nothing burned. At the end of the day, the fire went the other way, largely what they believe due to ceremony that we helped with out there. But they do know that they're going to deal with a lot of fires. The traditional people do. I don't know if others in the area do know how bad it's going to get. So I just wanted to leave you with that story. If there are any last words before we sign off?
Do our audience have any questions for any of our speakers, for Chief Mark or Dr. Pomeroy or Dr. Dawn Martin-Hill? Please comment now.
And we've shared the Dish with One Spoon documentary link.
Yeah, and we did share the Dish with One Spoon documentary link in the comments.
And our portal, we're developing a teaching portal. I didn't get a chance to show it, but maybe another time. We're just constructing it now. So it has everything from publications to research results to Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing land. So we got a lot populated in there, but artwork, digital stories, we probably have about 18 now, and films. So hopefully this will be a place any teachers, educators, policymakers can go to access resources, and it's free and it's available to the public, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. The sensors, we're not there yet. We'll probably have our sensors ready in about 6 months. All of them, there's several, and they'll be downloaded on your app so you can monitor your water in real time. That's on the horizon. So maybe the next couple of shows we'll be able to show that. But I think this conversation was more important. You can go to our website and see a lot of this information, right?
Yep. And we can post the link below into the comments if you want a link to our website. Yeah.
I also went through a little screen recording of it earlier.
Oh, okay.
Just kind of scrolled through it if anyone wants to rewind
Okay.
later.
Yeah, if anybody wants to rewind in this live stream, you can go back because Hannah screen recorded what it looks like.
Yeah, it's all
everything.
recorded.
Yeah, so I think that can.
I wanted to show Mark when he was really, really young in that little.
Okay.
Let's just show that just for fun.
We
Mark,
have the.
just so I can
Is
harass
that the
you.
AFN?
Yeah, that's the AFN one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is listening. Here's an opportunity for reconciliation through science and the environment, and I think it works. I think we could do it. I do. Got a great team. We could do this. Maybe not the film. Our Hannah, Hannah is amazing. She's like learning how to be a sound production engineer like overnight. She's had to like go through some. There we are, but you're inside.
This is what I want you to know about water in my community.
Can you flip it? All right, there we go.
Okay, it's on now. So
the Canadian government, led by me, will address this as a top priority.
So to be clear, you are committing them within 5 years there will be clean water for all First
In all
Nations?
those 93 communities, yes.
Later, like full on if they want to. So what was this, Mark?
Water in my community.
Well, this was basically an opportunity that I had in partnership with Vice News. I know you talked about it already, Don, in terms of the country of Canada not being on track, eliminating all water boil advisories. And so, we had an opportunity as youth and as young people.
You are committing them within 5 years there will be clean water for all First
In all
Nations?
those 93
Pretty
communities, yes.
Catherine, can you mute your Zoom?
Do you want to just turn the sound off and then
Okay, there you go. That's.
the audience can still hear it, but
The audience
The
can
audience
hear
can hear you, so you can keep talking. they can watch this later. So what was it, Mark, you were saying?
So it was basically, you know, giving, talking to young people across the country, and basically saying, you know, what would you like to say to our prime minister in regards to this? And, you know, I obviously brought up here in Six Nations, our wells that are, you know, almost close to 90% contaminated. As again, Dawn, you've alluded to what types of contaminants are actually within our well systems. And as we all know, you know, we rely heavily on trucked in water for our families here in Six Nations. So, you know, where that water then sits for how long, you know, again, is still a huge issue. So I mentioned a topic on that. But I liked more specifically towards the end of the video, you know, where it's basically just holding again the prime minister accountable, right? There's a lot of things I believe that we inherit when running in these types of positions, but you have to take into consideration again that once you are elected and in those, then you know we need to look and focus in on how we're going to fix it, whether it's been inherited to us or not, right? And so that was something that was really moving for me, so that I could at least be able to be a part of this video. Again, you've seen some really amazing advocates in that video as well. Often, or as well, sharing their message. You know, we had a message, and that was the goal. Was to, you know, you see one of the communities actually put in, you know, how it takes it's a financial burden. Often, right? We're already in a financial burden. And so then now to add a cost of constant, you know, purchasing of water or, you know, getting a water truck delivered to your home, as Dawn, again, you mentioned earlier, $200-300 a month, if not more, added upon something that you already are in poverty conditions and can't afford, right? And so that's something, as well as the impacts on, you know, that we have of not having access to clean drinking potable water. But that was my message at the end of the video was, you know, we helped you get to where you were, which is that I'm referring to the Prime Minister. You know, as Indigenous voters, it was a conservative year where, you know, we wanted to see Prime Minister Stephen Harper out of office. And, you know, that was the year that shook up the Canada vote. The Indigenous population actually shook up the Canada vote and actually helped get Justin Trudeau where he is today. So part of the end of that video was, you know, we helped you get to where you are today. Now help us get back to who we were and living off the land and having access to clean drinking potable water.
No, I agree 100%. And John, I think you're just as passionate about maybe getting Trudeau to commit to inclusion of First Nations in this water agency. I've seen some letters that you wrote.
I think we need to help him do what he wants to do, which is the right thing.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah. Let's give him a really good reason to like end kind of a few mistakes there with pipelines and kind of correct that and build something positive. That's a legacy. I think both for GWF to continue this work, but for First Nations to have access to all the science that they could possibly want, but also create their own science. Because, you know, we were left out of the equation for like 150 years. And I think that's why we're in the boat we're in. And we need to like really support Indigenous ways of knowing through this process as well. So I think it's a perfect union. What do you think, Kash?
Go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead.
I think as well, you know, it's again, Dawn, your work over all these, you know, the number of years, you know, it's ultimately looking to the bigger picture. That's what I see. And, you know, it's looking again to partnerships and again, collaborations with people like Dr. John and his team at GWF. It's partnering with, you know, the different universities and organizations that have a collective common goal. And that's just what you know, I like to feel as a leader that I want to be an inclusive leader. You know, I want to have opportunity for people to voice concern and for myself to be able to listen. And, you know, this issue in itself, I think is a huge accomplishment and where we are so far. I think, you know, it can only get better from here. And I think if we just strengthen our relationships moving forward, then I don't think that will be very hard to stop. So I think, I just want to just say nyawa and thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, now did
No,
you have some
thank you.
final thoughts from a young person involved in all of this?
Yeah, I think that coming together, I think we can basically do anything. And as Indigenous communities, we're very resilient. And I know my people are super resilient. And we can basically, and we have been basically doing whatever we put our minds to and whatever we work towards. So anything is possible. I think getting clean water to all of my community members is possible. I think that getting the Grand River clean again is possible. And I think getting all of our waterways clean again is all possible. We just have to work towards it. And that's what I think that's going to happen in our future, because we have a lot of great people working towards a healthy future.
Touche. Thank you. Well, thank you, John.
Right on.
Do you have any final parting words, John? Advice, saged wisdom?
The massive problems that we're all facing are the greatest that humanity has ever seen. And it will take all the goodness, all the wisdom, all the knowledge that we have collectively to solve them. And Global Water Futures, we look forward to solving these problems with you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nyawe.
Yahweh, you are a man of your word. I vouched for that with everybody in the community. So I want to thank you again. And thank Hannah and Catherine for all their hard work pulling it together.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Catherine. You're awesome.
And next week?
Next week, who do we have?
The Maori mental health workers. As you know, with COVID and isolation, and here at Six Nations, we've had some deaths. So I'd like to acknowledge the families who, are in mourning right now. And we can't really express our love for each other the way we used to because of COVID. There's just a lot happening. And so Lori Davis Hill, a community leader on our project for the house, really liked a model that the Maori use. It's a toolkit, because we're only interested in tools, not theoretical discussions about academic stuff that you can't apply in real world. Time to get down to business. And these Maori have a model, and we're looking at maybe helping create that model here at Six Nations to help our people deal with both anxiety from ecological grief and trauma, but also dealing with COVID. So it's going to be a really good show. We're timing it in New Zealand. They're really good.
Yeah.
And then, who else is there?
After that,
we're going to do a fundraiser for Land Back for their legal fund. I think you saw there was a really good speech. I don't know if you know her, Mark. She's Tibetan, and she's an MP. She gave an excellent statement in Queen's, the House of Commons. Again, working with everybody, but criminalizing land defenders or water protectors is a real problem. I know from Standing Rock, we had to raise a lot of money to get people that were the most peaceful people I know, like the most non-radical people on the planet. But they got caught, swept up. The medics, for example, were getting arrested. So we raise money for them for their legal fees. We want to do the same for Land Back. So we'll do an auction and have some local musicians on to see if we can get some money there. So, John, get all your wealthy friends to come and join us that week too. We do a lot of fundraising at Six Nations for a million reasons. So, we kind of tax out our own people for softball and all kinds of different things. So, it'd be good to use this platform. Is there an outgoing video you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you first. I think because Mark has to leave, so thank you, Nyawe Goa, Chief Mark Hill, and Dr. John Pomeroy and Dr. Don Martin Hill for being on the show. And thank you to all of our audience who are watching. I know I just had a message from a friend in Australia. So, and
Yeah, we're far and wide, people.
Yeah, from Australia, and we had one person who won a book from Hawaii. So we have viewers who are watching our show from around the world. So just so you guys know
Shout out.
and shout out to everybody who is watching us and keeps watching us. We have about 3 more episodes that's going to be happening in the next 3 weeks. So be sure to tune into those.
Yep. And like, subscribe, like button, hit that like button so we can stay alive. Sign up.
Makasha and Hannah and Catherine and everyone else involved. And again, just thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor to be here.
Awesome, Mark. You keep up the good job. And like the elders always said to me, your skin needs to be 7 inches thick so you can handle all those arrows coming at your back. So mine has grown. I'm good. You got to grow yours. That's the teaching.
I thoroughly appreciate that. I'm in my 10th year, so I think I maybe have about, 3 layers left or so.
Hurry up. Thank you, John.
Thank you. John. Take care and have a good evening.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Ona.
Bye.
Thanks, John. We'll be in touch, hopefully. Planning meeting.
Stay positive, test negative.
There you go.
There you go.
Take care, Ona.
The saying of the year.
So we're going to have a local musician, right? Yay, Logan Stotts.
So we're going to have Logan Stotts' video coming up next.
Hopefully he'll be here for the land back fundraiser we're going to have for the guys who are charged. I think they're charging Skylar with $2 million or something, or 20, or oh my goodness. And I don't know if people know this, but Haldeman track people that took all of our money to build the infrastructure, roads and farming equipment and all the things they did. I think I added it up, and it was, how much, Hannah, was it? Well, no, my engineers on our team added it up. It came to almost $7 trillion at 6% interest. So our argument is settle just one land claim, give us back some of our money with 1% to 6% interest, and we could take care of all of this all by ourselves. But until then, our guys are criminalized and charged, and I hope they come to a peaceful resolution. Skylar will be joining us on that show, along with some musicians. So please join that one as well. Be safe, everybody. Stay alive.
Oh, no.
Don't get arrested. Be good.
Don't get arrested.
Warrior.
I found a love you've never seen. I wish I never saw coming. Hit me in waves just like the sea. I wish I never started running away. But I keep searching till it starts burning. 'Cause when it hurts, at least I know I'm learning. Don't forget me in the fire. Don't you let me lose a flame. So protect me from the side. I get lost in the field of the flame, of the flame, of the flame. I lost a high I can't explain. I wish I had seen it coming. Give me a heart that I can tame. Wish I wasn't always running away. So I keep searching till it starts burning. 'Cause when it hurts, at least I know I'm learning. Don't forget me in the fire. Don't you let me lose a flame. So protect me from the side. I get lost in the field of the flame, of the flame, of the flame. Of the flame, of the flame, of the flame. Of the flame, of the flame, of the flame. lose before you win. So don't give up and don't give in. You gotta lose before you win. Don't forget me in the fire. Don't you let me lose the flame. So protect me from desire. I get lost in the fear of the flame, of the flame, of the flame. I get lost in the fear of the flame, of the flame, of the flame.
Thank you to our 3 viewers who are watching right now. I know it's a really long show, so thank you so much for hanging in there. And hopefully we see you next week and then the next 3 coming weeks. Be sure to tune in on Thursdays at 7 p.m. on Ohneganos Water is Life Facebook page on Ohneganos. Let's Talk Water podcast, and see you next week. Ona.